Hi everyone, it's Jen again. Had another great week, very productive. That always makes me happy. And I thought I would just share kind of like what I have been trying to do to kind of push myself a little bit, challenge myself a little bit to making the aftermath deadline, the end of November. So one of the things that may or may not be surprising is that the story heavy moments of the game require a lot more time and effort on my part to complete than the chapters that have like a war mission or even a dungeon, because a lot of that type of content has reusable elements to it that saves me work. So I think that's one of the reasons why I've come to realize that having like very story heavy games is actually very like labor intensive, because any of the new content requires like all new creation. So during the aftermath, it is an only story is happening, and originally I was planning on only having a set of maybe 6 new illustrations for the bond conversations with the elite units, and that gradually turned into, well, I also have this banquet scene, so I think I'm going to draw all 13 elite characters in their formal outfits, which also led me to think, well, it's the last conversation that the player's gonna have with the common units. Like, in the back of my mind, I always wanted to make a little portrait for them to just kind of show off a little bit of their own individuality, despite having this kind of color swap template for their battle sprites. Much in the same vein of like Fire Emblem, how a lot of the knight sprites all kind of look the same, just with like maybe a tiny little differences here and there. But when it came to the portrait sprites, the details that were added could give the characters a lot of distinctive personality. I kind of wanted to do that the same for the common units, at least give the player a chance to maybe see the characters a little bit more how I interpret their personalities. That said, one of the comments that I got on my video last week was about my journey that led me to kind of be where I'm at, that my art career did not pan out, and in the eyes of the world, that would be seen as like a failure, that people would think that, you know, it would be polite to give me their condolences and all. But to be honest, I've never been like happier or more content, more at peace with my life than I have been now. And I don't really see that as just purely resignation of like, oh, you know, my hopes and dreams, I've given up on them and I'm okay with it. Like, that's not how I view where I've come to be in my life right now. One of the things that I've realized is that for me, I actually get just as much done in a day that I'm working my full-time job as I do on days I have off. And it's not strictly because, oh, I have to do all these errands on my days off. I have to do laundry and, you know, whatever chores that I've been putting off all week. It's more because I've realized that more time does not necessarily mean more productivity or efficiency. Much like how there's been studies done that show that people are more productive working less hours a week than working necessarily more hours a week. I have found the same to be true about my creative process. When I was working in retail and I was doing webcomics, just as a hobby, I was doing I could do like maybe 2 to 4 pages of color from sketch to color in a day that I was working an 8-hour shift. And on my days off, maybe I could do 4 to 6 if I pushed myself. But oftentimes, Okay, so when I quit my retail job and I started doing comics full time again, and I tried to keep up with like a 4 to 6 pages a day type schedule, it was impossible for me. I started to burn out and I started to get distracted. Like I could feel myself getting distracted, and it was a real struggle and discipline to stay at my desk and to keep working. And oftentimes I would start getting distracted by, looking online, and I need something to listen to while I work, so let me go and spend 15 minutes here, half an hour there. Just browsing around for something to help occupy my mind while I'm focused on my drawing. And not only did this lead to unhappiness, it led to a feeling of weariness and tiredness of like pushing myself constantly past what would be, I think, my ideal window of productivity. So when I work nowadays, I've realized that I only have so many hours in a day, and so many hours, especially consecutively back to back, that I work at my most optimal. So rather than forcing myself to sit down at a desk for 6 hours to reach some arbitrary quota for the day, if I just think of my work in more like blocks of time, like I'm going to spend an hour drawing, and then I'm going to get up and walk the dog and do the laundry, and then I'm going to sit down and do another hour of drawing, and then I'm going to switch to doing an hour of writing, and then I'm going to switch back to doing an hour of drawing. If I break up these tasks so they don't become so monotonous, and I actually force myself to sort of switch gears in my head, I work so much more efficiently. I can get a drawing done that if I worked on it consecutively, like if I just sat down and told myself I'm going to get this sprite art done from beginning to end, it might end up taking me 4 hours. Versus if I say I'm going to work on this for an hour and then I'm going to switch up and do something else and then I'll come back to it and work on it for another hour, it could take me half that time. It is that much more efficient, which I didn't even realize was how I worked until more recently. I spent most of my life thinking the way a lot of people do, that, if I quit my job and I could work on this full time, I could get more done. And I could be less tired. When for me, it was the exact opposite, because it's about focus and intensity. If we're looking at strictly from a productivity perspective, it is about focus and intensity that I can create. I feel like is both my best work, is the most enjoyable. It is what, when I talk about like feeling energized by what I do and motivated, and how that motivation and energy comes effortlessly. And so I don't really worry about my health or my mental health anymore, or balancing my time, because once I kind of get into this schedule of being able to work most optimally, which sounds exhausting, like from a perspective of not being in the middle of doing it. If I had like a high intensity job where I was doing something that required a lot of effort and a lot of focus and a lot of problem solving and switching gears constantly and never really being able to just kind of zone out into a certain rhythm, and then I was also doing like high intensity, everything else in my life was high intensity, then yes, that would become exhausting and that would be too much. But breaking up doing creative tasks with kind of more menial tasks, but staying busy, actually keeps me more energized than if I were to just take a complete break and like lay on the couch and do nothing at all, because it keeps that momentum going. So a lot of like the menial tasks that we try to avoid in life actually are like the types of like breaking up my workflow and switching to like a lower intensity, like doing the dishes, like walking the dog, like doing the laundry, or even my job at the library. So I purposefully picked a job that is lower on the stress scale than many others. And yes, there are times when working with the public can become stressful, and there are times where everybody needs like something from me all at once. And these are like kind of high intensity situations, but that is not the majority of my day, if I'm honest. The majority of my day is usually more like low intensity kind of work than high intensity kind of work. And certainly I think it takes a certain type of personality to get used to dealing with high stress situations in a way that you can deal with it in that moment and then let it go. And I think if you have that mindset, then working with the public can be a lot more low intensity. If you take everything, if you take the high intensity, the stressful situations, and you let that dictate your mindset and your mood for the rest of the day, then that's going to be a very difficult and stressful job for you to maintain. But if you can deal with those high stress situations in the moment and then let it go, then I think some of these public facing jobs can actually be kind of low intensity with the right mindset. Because you hear a lot about how the public is difficult to deal with. That's because I think the negative experiences tend to stick with us more, and I'm definitely super guilty of this for the majority of my life. The negative situations, as kind of like a defense mechanism, stick with us more than the positive interactions that we have. But if we're actually surveying our interactions from like an objective perspective, more people are cooperative than not cooperative. You just don't notice the cooperative people as much because they don't require as much intense attention as the non-cooperative people. So having the job that I have right now really balances itself out for my working creatively, that I don't feel like I'm giving up anything creatively by working at my full-time job. If anything, my full-time job allows me to create in a more relaxed mindset because I'm not dependent on it financially. I don't have to worry about it. So then it can be a place of, of joy and of energizing, because there's no stress related to it. So if anything, like not working in the arts professionally has freed me to fully enjoy working on my art. And the time that I have to sacrifice in order to not depend on my art financially is time well spent as far as I'm concerned. It's not taking away from my artistic process. If anything, is augmenting it. So I would encourage people to try to think about it also from that perspective of, if you're in a situation where you want to do creative work, instead of thinking about whatever other types of jobs you have to do as taking away from time doing your artistic work, thinking of it as a way to augment your artistic process is another way to think about it. And it works for some of us more so than monetizing our art. That's the situation that I found myself in. And don't get me wrong, at first I was pretty depressed with having to, with my decision to give up on monetizing my art and trying to make a living doing that. But in retrospect, it was probably the best thing that I could have done for myself, because a lot of creative jobs are just highly exploitative. And they're exploitative because they're highly competitive. And I think there is a mentality that's very pervasive that we should be thinking ourselves lucky to be doing a creative type job because they are so highly competitive, that it demands even more sacrifice, even more it makes you more susceptible to being exploited, to signing bad contracts, to not advocating for your rights, to sacrificing a lot of other things in your life for the pursuit of that career that at the end of the day might not be your most ideal situation for yourself. So that's kind of the conclusion that I've found for myself, and I think that it works very well for myself. Objectively speaking, I think I create a lot. I create a lot, and if you look over the course of the last 4 years that I started creating, I create a lot consistently. I had a few moments where I was still kind of like learning how I work in this new schedule of mine. So the first couple years, the first projects that I was working on, I did have short moments of burnout, but they were never as bad as they were when I was working in comics. And the last couple years, I haven't dealt with burnout at all. So, and I still output a tremendous amount of creative work. I would say even more creative work than when I was before I was experiencing burnout, when I was pushing myself again. Objectively speaking, I haven't slowed down, and even when I was working full-time on my art, I wouldn't say that I slowed down from there either. Now, I'm also proficient in what I do, so there is a point where if everything you do is a struggle, you're not going to necessarily be able to maximize your efficiency in the way that I've kind of learned to do for myself. And maybe like your windows of focus are different than mine as well. Learn what works for you. But I guess it's just, again, the takeaway that I want to encourage people is to think outside the box for what makes you happy and what you want to get out of the creative process. And if you're somebody who's very productive like myself, you could find a way that works better for you than just throwing more hours at it. Okay. Have another great week. I'm super excited, looking forward to this upcoming week, and I'm currently ahead of schedule. Did a lot of art, did a lot of writing this week, and looking forward to hopefully finishing the aftermath by the end of next week. And if I don't speak to you before then, and you celebrate Thanksgiving, then have a happy Thanksgiving. I'm gonna make a turkey myself. All right, take care. Bye-bye.